Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Pikel with League of Items, and it is currently torrentially pouring in New Jersey. So Memorial Day weekend, I can't play golf. I can't go outside. The Knicks are losing, so I figured, what is a better use of my time than going through the LCS teams? The LCS starts up next week on Friday, I believe, May 4th. Yeah, May 4th. So in this video, I'm going to put together my thoughts about the teams as they head into the season. So there have been some changes. We'll go through some of those changes, and then that's basically it. So I think that the way I want to do this is just by going team by team from the bottom of the spring split standings through the top. So first up, we can talk about Golden Guardians. So last season, Golden Guardians was bad. Golden Guardians had a huge problem in terms of talent with their roster, and it's not just that they had problems with talent. They didn't really look like they were building towards anything. This is one of the issues of having older developmental players. Like if I'm gonna waste a split, I'd rather have a 17-year-old getting experience that I believe in their long-term talent. Instead, they had Niles. That didn't work out. He's going to their academy team. Newbie, their support, again another older player, who didn't have much experience in the region. Like, it just makes those acquisitions look really bad in hindsight, even though most people, I think, would agree that they weren't good to begin with. So that's a good place to start. So we have a new support in Chime. I don't know much about Chime. Chime sounds like a Bard one trick, so I'm just going to assume that they're a Bard one trick. They've bounced around a little bit, but they haven't made it to the upper echelon of the LCS, if you can even really call the LCS an upper echelon. Then next up, we have Solos coming in. Solo, an even older player. Solo's almost my age, which is pretty crazy. Solo's a good player, and I guess if you want to take the approach of like having a veteran presence on the team, then like you can justify his inclusion. But you already have Stixay, who I think is going to fill that role. So Solo, I've heard some bad stuff about Solo in terms of his attitude. Maybe he has a better attitude nowadays. Just not a player that I would invest time or money into if I was in an organization at this point. Is he better than a lot of the other top laners out there? Yes, but what is your end game? What are you trying to play towards? Are you trying to play towards the future? Are you trying to play to win right now? If you're trying to play to win right now, I think your roster's not good enough. So that kind of just is what it is. Iconic. The problem with Iconic, I think, is that he was held back by other teams' ability to just play through the top lane. I don't think that Niles was necessarily like doomed from the beginning, but their Golden Guardians playstyle, basically having Niles play weak side with like carry champions that he can try to 1v1, ends up getting 2v1'd all the time. Just really not a strong way to play League of Legends. So there's not much else to say about that. Ablaze Olive, he's been around for a long time. Not a difference maker, in my opinion. Not a top mid laner. So you don't have a top mid laner. You don't have a top 80 carry. You don't have a top jungler. You don't have a top support or top laner. They will most likely end the season as one of the two worst teams in the league. I'd be shocked if they were very competitive. Like, I don't see how those two changes alone. I mean, so let's talk about the best case scenario. So the best case scenario would be that subbing in Solo for Niles locks down the top half of the map, and you're not playing from behind as a jungler all the time. So then if they start playing very heavily around mid jungle duo, play the game slower, maybe that's something they could actually do. So if I was trying to think to myself, like, what style of team is this going to be? In order to win, I'd say they have to be a slower paced team, try to play the map intelligently, and look for 50-50 fights. somewhere down the road. I would expect them to have a losing record, and they'll most likely be a bottom 2 team. So that's it. Let's go to CLG. So CLG's roster is pretty similar, I think. This is what they wanted to have, and at the end of last season they started playing a little bit better. Let's see. Still 5-13. So let's see. Finn, okay top laner. League average, maybe better. But in in a world ranking, just not a good top laner. Broxa, pretty good jungler. I like Broxa in general. I think that he's an intelligent player. This is the thing with CLG, is at least they have a win now team, and they're all in on winning now. Finn is good enough to win now in the LCS. Broxa good enough to win now in the LCS. Pobelter good enough to win now in the LCS. And then Wild Turtle and Smoothie. I don't like Wild Turtle or Smoothie. But they do have players on their team who can take on a lot of the burden in the early and mid game, which will let Wild Turtle get into a late game, which gives him less opportunities to mess everything up for everyone. I know I'm very negative about him in general, but I just can't help myself. So with these names on this team, yes, you want to say that they're going to be middle of the table. Not sure how much better I can see than bottom 4. I think they'll most likely end up bottom 4. But there are a lot of ways for them to do much better. And the interesting thing for a team like CLG will be the jungle meta, because Broxa is... When Broxa was their most successful, they were playing a lot of Lee Sin, in those Lee Sin metas, which is potentially where we're headed. Even though Lee Sin is thought to be overpowered with his E clear in lane, maybe once they start pulling some power away from the E, people still want to play Lee Sin in the jungle. We'll have to see about that. But they could be competitive. I think their best finish would probably be 4th or 5th. Upside, I'll do that. So I'm just throwing this into a sheet so I can remember this in the future. Downside, upside. So CLG at their worst is 7-8. Upside is 4-ish. 7 or 8. 10. 7. Alright. So that's basically it. I mean, they're okay players with diverse champion pools. Obviously they have their preferences, but they can play in a lot of different metas. So I think that they'll be somewhat competitive throughout the entire split. Putting together good games, close games. But do they win a lot of those games? That's really the question. Next up, we have Flyquest. So their team is basically the same, and they might use Dreams. Doesn't really change much for me. I am probably just going to be negative towards Flyquest again. I think that people are giving Jose Dioto way too much credit for how the team, giving him too much credit considering how the team played last year or last split in a meta that should have been good for Jose Dioto. So if we get into a spot where it becomes more bot lane centric, or the entire game slows down, or junglers have less agency, I think that's going to be very bad for Flyquest. So I think that Flyquest, their worst case scenario, they could end up being one of the worst teams in the league. Probably not as bad as Golden Guardians, even in their worst case scenario. So I'll put 7 to 9. And then their upside, if everything breaks right for them, if everything breaks right for Flyquest, and they're able to play through top lane, I don't know. That seems very, very tough. Best case scenario, probably 5th or 6th. I don't see them doing much better than that. Licorice, still a good player. Jose Dioto maybe has the ability to become a better player, but just not a huge fan myself personally. Next up, we have Immortals. Okay, so we have the OCE bot lane, which is not good in my opinion. Insanity, okay player. Xerxes, okay player. Revenge, not a good player in my opinion. So with Xerxes, I think we are moving into a meta that could be good for Xerxes, but just because they'll be able to stay on tempo as a jungler doesn't mean that they're going to be able to win a lot of games. So this is another team where I think they're just kind of in the mishmash of the bottom half of the team, bottom half of the league. So I think that they could be as bad as 7th to 9th. And best case scenario is probably 5th or 6th. These teams are just not good. They're not building for the future, and they're not good enough to win now. So it's just a really bad spot to be for an organization. That's I don't know how else you could really see it. If you have a different opinion, feel free to share it in the comments. But I just don't see it. Next up, Evil Geniuses. Okay. Impact, Svenskeren, Jizuke, Danny, Ignar. So they basically got rid of Deathly and they brought in Danny. I like Evil Geniuses in general. I think that this is the sort of team that upside's probably 4 to 5. So we're getting a little bit better. But ultimately, can they compete with the best teams in the league? I don't think so. So I think 4 to 5 is really their top end. And their bottom, they could end up 7th or 8th. Nah, that doesn't seem likely. With Svenskeren, it should be a good meta for Evil Geniuses when we first start off, because Impact is good. He can play all different types of metas. Svenskeren, another good Lee Sin player, can survive in these tank metas. That's not going to bother him very much. Going into a tank meta would probably be very good for Jizuke, because it gives his champion pool even more flexibility to like exploit the slow tempo of the game. Like if we get a bunch of tanks, we can get that would kind of play into the split pushing power of Jizuke. And then Danny versus Deathly. Personally, I don't see a big difference. I don't know anything about Danny, but I wasn't big on Deathly. Like, Deathly's the kind of player, yes, he could have a lot of good performances in terms of kill scores, but is he really contributing to the winning difference? I would say most of the time the answer is no. Just more of like your quintessential replacement ADC. So Danny has a chance to, have a better ceiling than Deathly, so I do think that that's a good thing. These advertisements are kind of insane. What's going on there? So that's that with Evil Geniuses. Their downside. Worst case scenario is probably 7th. I don't see them doing worse than 7th. And I don't think that they're going to end up 7th. Next up, Dignitas. So Dignitas had a very good split last split. This is a perfect spot to be anti-Dignitas in the beginning of the season. If we go into a tank meta, I think that does a lot to hurt Dardoch. But at the same time, like theoretically, Dardoch could just continue to not play anything besides aggressive champions, have a diverse champion pool, play whatever he thinks is best for his team composition. All that's nice. The upside, based off last split, you kind of have to say the upside is 4th or 5th. But I don't think they're the 4th or 5th best team talent-wise in the league. I think that a lot of the results are kind of going to skew people's perceptions of Fake God, Soligo, and Neo when, they just won more games than you expected to, so you have good feelings about them. You think that they're good players, but they're such a small sample size. I just think that in the long run, talent is going to outweigh everything else, and I'm not convinced that these players are extremely talented. So I'm comfortable leaving them in the 4 to 5 range for their upside. Yeah. That's really the best I can do, though. I don't see them doing much better than that. 100 Thieves. So 100 Thieves, I have been very anti 100 Thieves for, the past year or so. I love Someday, but once they brought in all the Golden Guardians players, there was way too much hype around them, um, and it was a good spot to be like anti 100 Thieves, especially when they were in matches with like better teams. But they just keep getting a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. So closer, I do think is a good player. Probably a little overvalued by most people, but even in that scenario, still good enough to be on a winning team. Abadage, I think Abadage is a very good player. I'm excited by bringing in Abadage. I think that's a good thing. He's definitely better than Damonte and Ryoma, so that's good. Like this is the kind of move that teams should be going out of their way to make. I think that with Abadage, you are getting a player that could win now and can survive for multiple years, like being a part of a good team. Then we have FBI and Huhi. I think FBI and Huhi are overrated at this point as well. Not which isn't to say that they're not good. It's just I think I think that people give them a little bit too much credit. Um, they're not these gigantic difference makers. I just don't like when I think to myself, how is 100 Thieves going to win games? I think Closer and Abadage are going to have a lot of good opportunities to be competitive against the other mid jungle duos, and that's really the best way to play League of Legends right now. I think, especially with the way that the meta is going to shift. Um, but with that being said, 100 Thieves, I think that in reality their worst finish should be the 4 to 5 range. I think that they are talent wise much better than every team that we've discussed so far, which is a good thing. For their upside, I could see maybe second place, third place. Um, if I was judging it based off of regular season finish, I don't think that I can get them to the number one spot. And if I was doing it by um, the summer champion, do I think they could be the summer champion? I don't know. I think that's pretty difficult to get them all the way up there. Um, but if we're in a slower meta that takes away some agency from Closer, Abadage would be benefiting from that situation. Can play Azir, can play Kassadin, and can be the hardcore carry of a team. FBI and Huhi can go pretty even, and then how would they match up against everybody else? I guess, I mean, theoretically, I could see them getting up to number one and like having a really good playoffs, but I just think it's pretty unlikely. Like if I was thinking to myself, if I'm trying to assign percentage points to the best teams in the league, would I give them a 25% chance? No. Would I give them a 20% chance? No. Would I give them a 15% chance to win the league? Probably not. I'm probably in the 5 to 10% range for 100 Thieves. So 5 to 10%. I'll just leave that as the percentage. Like all these other teams, I don't think they could actually win. 100 Thieves, 5 to 10%. Sure, maybe you have a chance at winning the split. Team Liquid. Okay, so obviously Santorin had that weird situation during the playoffs, which kind of sucks. They missed out on MSI. I think that C9 was definitely still better than them, but Team Liquid's a solid team overall. Alfari played pretty well throughout the split. Alfari is definitely one of the better top laners in the league. I do think that overall Alfari is overrated in like a world perspective. Like how good are they compared to all these other players across the world? I think they're overrated, but for the LCS, I think they're definitely one of the 3 or 4 best top laners, which is a good thing to have on your team. Santorin, a flexible jungler, has a very diverse champion pool, is going to be fine in a tank meta, and is okay in a carry meta, but the tank meta is probably better for them. If we get into this like extreme late game meta, which generally happens in the summer split as we get closer to Worlds, I think that could be good for Team Liquid because that allows them to play slower. They can build up for these gigantic team fights around 3rd or 4th Dragon or around Baron. They're all relatively intelligent players. They know how to to win in that type of environment, which obviously like everybody in League of Legends can do that, but what you really want to see is like, can a team win from a losing position in that scenario? And I think Team Liquid is one of those teams that can do that. So I think that worst case scenario, Team Liquid ends up probably fourth, and then with upside, I think that they win. I have roughly 90 percentage points, so I would say I'm going to start off at 10 to 30, 10 to 30%, and then we'll switch once we discuss the last two teams. TSM, it's weird. Like I never really think of myself as a TSM fan, but I see myself playing them a lot in like DraftKings, and I do like the players. I think it's because I feel like the public perception around TSM is overly negative because they're under the spotlight so hard, and there are a lot of easy narratives that I just don't believe are true about TSM. So in the top lane, we have Huni. I think Huni is one of the three or four best top laners in the league. I understand that there are a lot of situations where Huni looks like they've made a gigantic mistake or is willing to die when they're losing. But in order to get back into the game, you need to be willing to make those kinds of plays. So you have to play like the way that he does, in my opinion, if you want to convert a losing position. Spica, good player, one of the three or four best junglers in North America right now. Power of Evil, I love Power of Evil. I think that this is a good meta for TSM as well, because it'll be more difficult for the lesser teams to create large enough advantages to beat the better teams. So I do think you'll have the top four teams with like much better records than the lower teams. It's not going to be like an LEC situation from last split where a lot of the teams had the same record near the top of the table. I think it's probably just going to turn into the haves and the have-nots, which is it's somewhat annoying to watch, but it's okay. Like, they need to go out and they need to get their victories against those bad teams still. So, that's basically it. And then Lost and Sword Art. I think that Sword Art did not have the impact many people thought they would in their first split. I think that will not continue to be the same. I think that they'll just get better and better. So as time goes on, I do expect TSM's bot lane to perform better. As a bot lane, they're probably the third or fourth. They're top three or four regardless. So TSM, I think their downside is 4. If they finish any less than 4th, it'd obviously be a huge problem. Like, just a huge problem. I'm going to put them at 10 to 30% as well for right now. And then last but not least, we have C9. And C9 decided to move Zven to the Academy roster and bring in King. So we need to discuss this because it is, in my opinion, a bad move. I know that there are a lot of people out there who like King, specifically Tim from Oracle's Elixir. He watches a lot of Academy. He knows what he's talking about. But I think that the difference is that it just doesn't make sense to me from a team building perspective. And I'll discuss why right now. So one of the things that I'm sure you're going to hear during the next couple of weeks is, fresh face King, new player, young player, finally getting their chance on the LCS stage. Good for them. They're a young player. This is so great. Right now, King is the oldest player on Cloud9. So you take all the other players on Cloud9. You have Blabber, Perks, and Vulcan. All three of them have a ton of experience on the not international, but they all have a ton of experience domestically and some of them international, playing in these high pressure situations. And it's funny because a lot of the people who are willing to say, "Oh yeah, it's a good move to get rid of Zen and put in King," those are the same people who use the crutch argument of experience to differentiate between players instead of talent. I don't know enough about King to say that they are a more talented player than Zven. I think it's very unlikely that they are substantially better than Zven. So then you have to ask yourself, what does Zven bring to the table that King potentially does not? Zven has the experience. If you're looking to win and be competitive at a tournament like MSI or at Worlds, does it make more sense to leave Zven in the team for this split, and just see how good they can do domestically? Because if you give King all of this stage time in North America and C9 makes it to Worlds and King goes up against these other teams and just shows that they cannot be good on the international stage, you're going to be in the first round, second round, or the play-in stage or the group stage, and you're going to have to make that decision as a coach. Do I want to put in Zven or do I want to leave in King? And that just it's just not that's a situation that you want to avoid at all costs, in my opinion. If you get like 4 or 5 games into the summer split and you realize, King's really not that much better than Zven. Zven's playing well in academy. Let's just put Zven back in the starting roster. Then you miss 4 or 5 games, really not a big deal. If you let King play the entire summer split, and then you get into Worlds, and then you start losing, you're going to have a very difficult decision to make, and everyone's going to second guess you for the rest of the tournament. Especially because C9 will most likely not be able to compete on an international level. Could they get to the knockout stage? Yes. Could they get to the quarterfinals? And if they get a good bracket, the semifinals? Sure, it's possible. But in terms of talent, comparing this team to other teams around the world, you're not relying on your bot lane to be the difference maker. So now let's talk about the different play styles that you have. If you're playing through top lane, does going from Zven to King help you or hurt you? In my opinion, it hurts you. Zven has proven through multiple years that they are capable of playing weak side and playing the macro game the correct way. You can't just get rid of that. That's just the reality of the situation. If you're playing through Blabber, once again, does having King help you or hurt you? In my opinion, having Zven is better because of the exact same reasons. The only way that I could see it being a benefit to have King is if they look at someone like King as a player similar to Huanfeng, where if they say to themselves, if we get King through the early and mid games even, then they are a team fighting god, and they will be able to outperform other AD carries in North America, in Europe, and internationally. Do I think that it's likely that King is that much better than Zven? I'd be very surprised. That is literally the only scenario that justifies this change. If you think King is actually better and gives your team, not actually better, if King is substantially better and gives you the ability to play a different playstyle that is not available with Zven. So then let's say King is someone you can play around as a true carry, then you're not playing around Perks. And Perks is obviously your best player. Perks and Blabber are your 2 best players on your team. Your focus in draft should be getting those 2 players gigantic advantages in the draft phase. So again, does having King in your team open up different drafting options? The answer is definitely no. Unless you're playing around them. And I don't think that playing around King is the correct way to play. So even in the scenario where King becomes the focal point of the team, in order for that to be a good way to play, you would need to, well, not prove, but it would need to be the reality that Zven is not capable of also playing with all of those resources. And Zven has not been given the opportunity to play with those number of resources on C9 consistently. And then the last thing is, Mithy's becoming the head coach, Reignover's going to the assistant coach. Did Mithy becoming the head coach have something to do with Zven going to the academy roster? I would hope not. That'd be a ridiculous thing to let happen, because you have so much time and money invested in players like Fudge, Blabber, Perks, and Vulcan. Now is not the time to mess around with your roster in order to get a new head coach, because it's just, you can't prioritize that over everything else. So I hope that's not the case. It's most likely not the case. But even in all the other scenarios that I laid out, I just don't understand why they would really need to make that change. So that's kind of my issue. Worst case scenario, I could see C9 with the whole King thing. Maybe they can go down all the way as low as 4. I doubt it. I think they're definitely the favorites to win the split. I think that C9 probably wins the playoffs between 40 to 50% of the time. I'm very bullish on C9. I'll take them against TSM. I'll take them against Team Liquid. So let's see. I think C9 wins 40 to 50%. So let's put 40%. I think that Team Liquid probably wins more often than TSM. So let's put Team Liquid at 30%, TSM at 20%, and then 100 Thieves at 5%. Maybe TSM 15%. I do think that. So we'll do Team Liquid 25%, TSM 15%, 100 Thieves 10%. That's 40, and then everyone else is like 1 or 2%. I don't think that they will. I don't think that those. I think that I'd rather have any one of the top 4 teams instead of having a bet on the rest of the teams. It's basic. That's basically how I look at it. So my rankings going into this split would be C9 number 1, Team Liquid number 2, TSM number 3, 100 Thieves number 4. Then I would have Dignitas and Evil Geniuses tied. I'd have CLG above Immortals and Flyquest. And then last but not least, I'd have Golden Guardians. So, I'm interested to hear what other people have to think about the roster changes that we've seen, and especially with the move of Zven going to the bench in the academy, or going to the academy roster. So that's all I got for you today. Starts up next week. I'm very excited to get back into DFS. MSI is okay, but they're just not fun competitions to really play in with the different format and everything. So, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.